Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anfisa and I'm a senior product designer who loves to share my experience with the aspiring designers and help you to transition to actual UX design. In today's episode, I would like to take you through the case study presentation I was given to the companies where I've been applying recently. The particular case study structure I'm going to share with you in 1 second is basically something that you will probably be sharing with your design team or design manager in a later stages, normally third or fourth stage of the hiring process when you're asked to share some of your case studies or some of your projects in depth. Alright, so with this context in mind, let's actually dive into the presentation, and now I will start by sharing the structure and then we'll get into the case study that got me hired. Let's get started by actually looking at the case study structure from the higher level perspective. Because first thing you need to understand is that you're not here to tell the exact story of what happened. It's not that you have to say, okay, I did personas, I did user journeys, I did design brief, and here is the results. It's not what it should be. Please keep this in mind. The first tip here is pretty fundamental, is that you need to look at the case study structure or a presentation, not like it is a room tour where you're just saying what furniture you're seeing in front of you, but think of it as a real estate presentation. When you're trying to sell it, think about it as a storytelling. What matters is what was the beginning, what was during, what was the middle, the messy middle, and then what was the resolution. So keep this in mind. This is a structure you have to kind of high level remember. With these slides, this structure, I'm going to just share with you more tactical things like what kind of blocks I'm usually planning, but every single case study or every single project is individual and you will still need to adapt it or adjust it to the story that you have gone through. So keep in mind that this is just very general. You can apply it, but most likely you will need to adjust it to your story anyways. So normally, obviously, you start with the name and then you say who you are and blah, blah, and what was the challenge. Then I'm usually try to always specify the problem, maybe some numbers, maybe some the testimonials that the client shared or the real market need they have been noticing. The goals is obviously coming from this problem. Let's say if the problem was low conversion rates, obviously the goal would be here to focus on things like we want to improve the conversion, we want to improve the attitudes and how people perceive our brand and stuff like that. So again, what are you trying to achieve here? Then I'm also trying to say what kind of constraints we had with this project. So for example, if we didn't have engineers working, or if we didn't have any data, or if we have very limited budget. Then very briefly, I do mention process, but normally I'm following the double diamond process, classic, almost cliche, but I'm still trying to always say what steps was I going through just for the high level context. Then this is the moment when I start telling the story. This section would be a bit longer because here I would probably mention what steps I took, what kind of research methods I've been using, what kind of most important insights, and the insights is the key here. So what kind of insights I've been collecting and how those insights were turned or reframed into the how might we's or design project requirements. So how exactly the research I've been doing informed me and helped me to translate these data, these insights into the actionable next steps for the design project. And then I'm also talking about my first exploration. Maybe I did some market research. Maybe there are some things that I've been inspired by or excited to try out in the project. So I'm trying to give some understanding on the exploration, my thinking process. Then, of course, I'm starting to dive deeper into designs. Here is where I'm actually starting thinking flows, information architecture, or actual design screens, key solutions. Maybe there are specific parts we needed to resolve for. I'm just gonna sort of mention here are the critical solutions that helped us to achieve certain results. And then, of course, the testing. I share some background on the testing methods I've been using and what specific insights I've been learning from it, especially my interpretation of this. This is, I think, what's the most important thing to see for the hiring managers. They want to see your thinking process. And finally, let me also show you the applicable example of the case study presentation I was doing specifically and show you how the structure was laid out on this particular project. And by the way, I forgot to mention that this structure with more examples, actually with specific slides that you can use and reuse and change colors and all of that, adapt it for your own needs, I will also share. So feel free to download this case study structure Figma link For that, just click on the link right under this video. Now, without any further ado, let's dive into the case study itself. Obviously, when I start the project, I would start from the problem context. In the context, I would specify, what problems I've been discovering with the clients early on. Specifically in this case, I knew that the problem was due to a very bulky WordPress template and that the whole project was designed by a graphic designer, not a UX designer. So there were a lot of issues done on the, usability side of it. Also, the business goals we discussed early on were that we need to make sure we are not losing the returning users, and we actually have some mechanisms in place to also bring new customers. Then, of course, I would really quickly go through the process, which is pretty classic. These would be the sections I would take the viewer through one by one. And obviously, I would start by understanding how did I understand the problem. And for that, as I mentioned, I needed to do some benchmarking and assessing the current experience so I can later measure it upon. Here I also wanted to mention the key user insights that were very much requested by the end user, as well as I specified in the left side in which way I've collected this data. So basically in this case, I was doing the usability testing on the top 5 tasks of that website. As well as after the test, I would ask users to fulfill this usability score survey and get some kind of mark, the first mark and the first grade for the experience, which is pretty low for the standards. As well as I was doing the UX audit, and there are some very obvious issues that were detected, which I would talk in the next slides about. But most importantly, what I had to mention also to the viewers that after a lot of UX evaluation, client agreed to move the site from the pretty bulky WordPress to a custom-built service, which enabled a full range of new improvements and new feature developments, which is great. Now, next section was converging those insights, and by that I meant that I wanted to outline 6 areas for improvement, and based on all of the insights, actually, I couldn't fit all of the insights. I needed to just focus on the most important one, and the way for me to communicate it was to kind of group them or cluster them by the most urgent and important things to design for, because we cannot fix everything in the world. We have to prioritize, and these are the priorities I was going for. The first one was visual hierarchy. And by the way, important note here is that please try to not overwhelm the viewer with too much information on the slides, because obviously you will be presenting, so you can add all the details as you go. You don't need to write it all down. Just focus on showing what you are talking about. So better show than tell in the slides. Then I will specify, okay, here the problem was the clunky scanning experience. You could see that the eyes would move back and forth. It's not going to be easy. And I will specify in which way I collected this data. I would specify that based on the audit, I've noticed a lot of those strange buttons. I would also mention that there is some friction on the logic side. For example, in this case, the content was not organized very user-friendly based on the user needs and intentions. With the system feedback, also, again, I was collecting different aspects of the experience, and another one would be this edge case where I would notice, the system feedback is detached from the experience. I'm not gonna go into all details and some of the features that were requested as well. And then as I started kind of going through the problems, I also wanted to mention some considerations or requirements for the designing. Then at this point we were looking for the developer. I needed to prepare the information architecture structure so the developer would also be able to estimate the amount of work. Now, based on those problems, I've started then thinking about all those possible very broad range of solutions and explorations. And here I'll just show, okay, here on my thinking process, I was going through this thing and this iteration, and then eventually I chose this version, basically concept number 4, because of XYZ reason. If you're showing different concepts, the rationale would be very important. This is most likely will be the question that if you don't answer in the presentation, people will be asking you later, because they want to understand your thinking, why you chose this direction, why you thought this would be a better concept over another one. And then, of course, I will start going through the designs. And in this particular case, I decided just to show like a quick walkthrough of all the screens and maybe just point out some of the important points. Here I've added also a prototype. In the presentation, I would switch to the prototype mode and show the whole experience step by step. Also specify some other flows, specify, extra cases, shopping carts, all other, flows that are important. Like I mentioned, I would also add some edge cases and the components library. And then key solutions, I would also remind about the issues that I was dealing with, and then show before, after, like, okay, the problem was visual hierarchy, here's how I organized it, or here's how was the scannability before, and here is the scannability we would go for now, and here is the interaction design improvement, and here is the infinite scroll improvement and logic updates and stuff like this, or system feedback improvement and stuff like this. So again, I would specify how exactly I have tackled the problems I have discovered in the explorational stage. And finally, the validation, probably the most juicy and interesting part for most of the companies, because they always look into understanding how exactly you're interpreting data you're collecting from the users. And this is also another way to shine. Trust me, this is very important for the storytelling, because this is normally a resolution part of your story where you show how your expectation meets the reality. In this case, I was going for different types of navigation. One would be in the top, and second would be on the bottom, to inform the user about, sort of guide the user through the steps they have to be taken. And then interestingly, I would notice that people succeed better if they actually don't have any guide in the bottom, and it will be basically guided by days and then those accordions. Also, attitudinal data would show the same kind of results. In the tests, those were the quantitative tests where I would send the links to the users, and they would go through some of the tasks, and then I would ask them questions about how intuitive was that and what were the obstacles. And this is the data I have collected. And also, I have noticed that in this case, people pointed out that they couldn't update their meal because they tend to click on the start over. So it was pretty clear that people got sort of confused about how do they edit. They just ignored this button mainly. And so I had to update it, and I also decided to show, okay, here's how we update it, here's how I would restructure the buttons, reprioritized it, meeting the user needs more intuitively. So if people needs to edit it, it will be just there. Instead of starting over and kind of quitting the scenario, people will be able to edit things. And then the duplication flows, again, same principles. I would mention the problems people mentioned, and then I would say how I've updated the flow. And the same with the meals number increase. This was interesting because I would also add here like a user journey. By the way, for this, I'm using the tool called Useberry. It's a great tool. I always recommend it for the quantitative unmoderated testing, for the prototypes particularly. So here I would see where people went, when I expected them to go and where they go, and then it could give me some data and how I've updated this data. Not gonna go into so many details, it's a pretty lengthy video already, but you got it. Now, as a result, I would also measure my design and show that, okay, the previous SUA score was like really low, the grade was F, but the next score was 82, which is B, which is not bad, and also specify what were the major changes for the project, given this design project. And that would be almost it. I would also try to mention what things I would improve, because obviously design is never done. I mean, this project was done almost actually 2 years ago already, and I can already see a lot of space for improvement. So I would kind of mention here what I would do better this time around. And then, of course, I would also give the viewers space for questions, and also leave here the links for them to walk through and also have their own impression if needed. But that is basically it. And I really hope this video was helpful for you. If you have questions, of course, just drop them down. I will try to answer those. And like I said, you can also use the template. Just click on the first link you will see under this video, and you will get an access to this template. I hope that really helps. And otherwise, see you in the next videos. Bye bye.